You think you knew Danny Kaye, the rubber-faced comedian who made you laugh in White Christmas, the children's hero who traveled the world for UNICEF, the wholesome entertainer who sang those impossible tongue twisters while dancing across your television screen. But what if everything you thought you knew about one of Hollywood's most beloved stars was just an elaborate performance? What if the man who brought joy to millions was hiding a darkness so profound that even his closest friends barely recognized the person behind the smile? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on Danny Kaye's twisted double life, and I promise you, the truth is far darker than anything Hollywood could have scripted. Before we dive into the shadows that haunted Danny Kaye's extraordinary life, let me tell you something that will make your blood run cold. When actor Tony Curtis published his memoir in 2008, he wrote something that shocked the entertainment world. He said, and I quote, "To my way of thinking, Danny was a very mean and bitter man, and almost everybody seemed to agree with me. He would belittle me all the time. This wasn't some tabloid gossip. This was one Hollywood legend speaking truth about another. And Curtis wasn't alone." According to reports from the Los Angeles Times, scathing anecdotes surfaced about Kaye's often boorish treatment of people, while his omnivorous sexual exploits had been well documented throughout his career. The man who made children smile was allegedly making adults cry behind closed doors. But how did we get here? How did a boy from Brooklyn become one of the most complicated, contradictory figures in entertainment history? Let's rewind to January 18, 1913, in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, New York. A baby boy named David Daniel Kaminsky entered the world, the son of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants who had fled persecution in Russia. His father, Jacob, worked as a tailor, struggling to make ends meet in a new country that promised opportunity but delivered hardship. His mother, Clara, tried to create a warm home despite their poverty. Young David, whom the family affectionately called Davidella, grew up in tenement buildings where dreams seemed as distant as the homeland his parents had left behind. The family couldn't afford the finer things in life, and when young David expressed his childhood dream of becoming a surgeon, that dream was immediately crushed by economic reality. There simply wasn't money for medical school. But what the Kaminsky family lacked in financial resources, they made up for in something else entirely. The need to escape, to become someone else, to create a persona that could transcend the limitations of their circumstances. Danny Kaye's relationship with performance began early, but not in the way you might imagine. This wasn't a child discovering joy in entertainment. This was a child discovering that being someone else, anyone else, was preferable to being himself. He started singing and dancing at Jewish weddings when he was just a small child, and people noticed something unusual about him. He wasn't just performing, he was transforming. Years later, biographer Michael Friedland would argue that like a real-life Walter Mitty, Kaye never pushed himself to the limits of his talents, suggesting that the performances were always a shield, a way to avoid confronting who he really was underneath all the characters he created. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who would become one of the most celebrated entertainers of his generation, and yet his biographer believed he was always holding back, always hiding behind personas rather than revealing his authentic self. School didn't capture Danny's attention. At 13 years old, he dropped out, unable to see the point of continuing his education when his family needed money and his soul needed escape. He took a series of jobs that all ended the same way, with him being fired. He worked as a soda jerk at a pharmacy, mixing ice cream floats and cleaning counters, but his mind was always elsewhere. He became an auto insurance investigator, a job requiring attention to detail and responsibility, but Danny's restless spirit couldn't be contained in an office. He worked as an office clerk, pushing papers and watching the clock, feeling his life slip away 1 minute at a time. Every job ended with the same result: termination. Looking back, we can see this pattern clearly. Danny Kaye wasn't failing at these jobs because he lacked intelligence or capability. He was sabotaging himself, creating situations where he would be forced to leave, to move on, to continue searching for something he couldn't even name. But then came an opportunity that would change everything. His first real job in entertainment was working for a dentist named Dr. Samuel Fine in his Brooklyn neighborhood. Now, pay attention to this name, because Dr. Fine would end up playing a role in Danny's life far more significant than employer. Dr. Fine had a daughter named Sylvia Fine, and when Danny met her, something clicked into place. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. At the dental office, Danny said he was drawn to the idea of lessening people's pain. Isn't that ironic? The man who would allegedly cause so much pain to the people around him started his working life wanting to alleviate suffering. Perhaps that contradiction was always there, lying dormant, waiting to emerge. In 1933, at 20 years old, Danny finally caught a break. He joined a vaudeville dance act called the Three Terpsichoreans, performing in Utica, New York. It was here that David Daniel Kaminsky officially became Danny Kaye. The name change wasn't just professional, it was symbolic. David Kaminsky, the poor Jewish kid from Brooklyn who couldn't hold down a job and whose family couldn't afford his dreams, ceased to exist. In his place emerged Danny Kaye, the performer, the persona, the construction. And this construction would become so complete, so total, that eventually, even Danny himself might not have been able to find David Kaminsky underneath all those layers of performance. The real turning point came when Danny ventured to the Orient in 1934. This journey would prove transformative in ways that shaped his entire approach to entertainment. In Asia, he learned to sing, dance, monologue, mime, and scat professionally. He absorbed techniques from cultures vastly different from his Brooklyn upbringing, incorporating styles and rhythms that would later become his signature. But even then, according to reports, Kaye was just another hard-luck entertainer, struggling to make a name for himself in an oversaturated market where thousands of performers competed for scraps of attention. Then, in 1940, everything changed when Danny married Sylvia Fine. Now, this wasn't just a marriage. This was a business partnership, a creative collaboration, and according to numerous sources, a transaction that would define and confine both of them for the rest of their lives. Sylvia wasn't just Danny's wife. She was his lyricist, his composer, his manager, his creative director, and some would say his puppeteer. She wrote the tongue-twisting songs that would make him famous. She crafted his stage persona. She controlled his career with an iron fist wrapped in matrimonial legitimacy. And according to Michael Friedland's Biography, their relationship was complicated from the very beginning. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Most notably, within just 2 years of marrying Sylvia, Danny began a torrid 6-year affair with actress Eve Arden. Yes, that Eve Arden, the wisecracking character actress who would later become famous as the title character in Our Miss Brooks. Eve eventually left her husband, Ned Bergen, for Danny. The affair was one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets in the 1940s. They were spotted together constantly, clubbing with other celebrities like Humphrey Bogart, making no effort to hide their relationship. And Sylvia knew. Of course she knew. Everyone knew. Hollywood thrived on knowing everyone else's business. The affair created such turmoil that in 1947, Danny and Sylvia separated. For 6 months, Danny actually left his wife for Eve Arden. During this time, they were essentially living as a couple, and Hollywood society was buzzing with speculation about whether Danny would actually divorce Sylvia and marry Eve. But then something happened. Danny went back to Sylvia. He returned home in 1948, reportedly making a promise that he would never leave Sylvia again. Notice I said never leave, not be faithful. Because according to multiple sources, including blog posts analyzing their relationship, Danny vowed to never leave Sylvia again, but not to be faithful. Let that sink in. The arrangement wasn't about monogamy or traditional marriage. It was about maintaining appearances, preserving the partnership, keeping the machine running regardless of what happened behind closed doors. On December 17, 1946, in the middle of this turbulent period, Danny and Sylvia's only child was born, a daughter named Dina. Now, imagine being a child born into that situation. Your father is having a very public affair. Your mother knows but maintains the facade of their marriage. Your entire childhood is a performance, a carefully staged production where everyone plays their assigned roles regardless of what they actually feel. According to accounts from Dina herself in later interviews, when she was very young, she didn't like seeing her father perform. She didn't understand why Daddy was pretending to be someone else, why he made funny faces and talked in silly voices. Even as a small child, Dina seemed to sense something unsettling about her father's transformations. But the Eve Arden affair was just the beginning of Danny Kaye's complicated romantic life. During the 1950s, another rumor began circulating through Hollywood, one so explosive that it would remain controversial decades after Danny's death. Author Donald Spoto published a biography of Laurence Olivier in which he made an unsubstantiated claim that Kaye had a 10-year secret affair with one of the greatest actors of the 20th century, Sir Laurence Olivier himself. According to Spoto's account, this relationship allegedly lasted throughout the 1950s, while Olivier was still married to Vivien Leigh, the woman who played Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Now, let's be clear about something important. This claim has never been proven. English journalist Terry Coleman, who spent 4 years studying Olivier's archive of letters and memorabilia, said he could not find evidence of such an affair between Kaye and Olivier. Joan Plowright, Olivier's widow, vehemently denied the allegations, calling them baseless speculation designed to sell books. However, what is documented is that Kaye and Olivier were extremely close friends. Olivier reportedly called him Lally, and they spent considerable time together. The nature of their relationship, whatever it was, became fodder for endless speculation, particularly because Danny Kaye had always presented as someone whose persona didn't fit conventional masculine stereotypes of the era. In a fascinating academic paper titled On the Double, The Hidden, Queer and Jewish Career of Danny Kaye, scholars analyzed Kaye's performances and public persona, noting that he looked like a big old queen. The paper explored how Kaye navigated Hollywood during an era when being anything other than conventionally masculine and heterosexual could destroy a career. There were whispers, rumors, coded language in Hollywood circles. Despite his marriage to Sylvia Fine, who also managed his career, the speculation persisted throughout his life. Whether these rumors had any basis in fact, or were merely the product of Hollywood's tendency to gossip about anyone who didn't fit neatly into conventional boxes, remains an open question. But what's undeniable is that Danny Kaye lived a life filled with secrets, hidden relationships, and carefully maintained public facades. Beyond the romantic entanglements, there was another side to Danny Kaye that many people never saw, a side that contradicted everything his public persona represented. Remember that quote from Tony Curtis? "Danny was a very mean and bitter man, and almost everybody seemed to agree with me. He would belittle me all the time." This wasn't an isolated opinion. The Los Angeles Times reported that scathing anecdotes surfaced about Kaye's often boorish treatment of people, particularly those he considered beneath him in the Hollywood hierarchy. His omnivorous sexual exploits were well documented, suggesting a man who pursued relationships not for connection but for conquest, for validation, for something that always remained just out of reach no matter how many people he seduced or how many hearts he broke. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. Danny Kaye, the man who would become UNICEF's first Goodwill ambassador and travel the world advocating for children, was reportedly cruel to the adults in his life. The contradiction is almost too stark to comprehend. How could the same man who brought joy to millions of children be described by his colleagues as mean and bitter? How could someone so publicly compassionate be privately cruel? The answer might lie in understanding the difference between performance and reality, between the persona Danny Kaye created and the man David Kaminsky, who still existed somewhere underneath all those layers. Danny's career reached extraordinary heights during the 1940s and 1950s. He starred in 17 films, including Wonder Man in 1945, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty in 1947, oh, the irony of that title, Hans Christian Andersen in 1952, and White Christmas in 1954. His performances were characterized by physical comedy, idiosyncratic pantomimes, and rapid-fire novelty songs that showcased his incredible talent for tongue twisters. Songs like The Maladjusted Junkman and Stanislav Sky featured impossibly complex lyrics delivered at breakneck speed, demonstrating Danny's unique gift for linguistic gymnastics. He could make audiences laugh until they cried, all while never revealing a single authentic emotion of his own. In 1963, The Danny Kaye Show premiered on CBS, running for 4 successful years and earning Danny an Emmy Award. The variety show format was perfect for him because it required constant transformation, constant performance, constant shifting between characters and personas. He never had to be himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Viewers loved it. They tuned in every week to see what Danny would do next, what character he would inhabit, what impossible song he would sing. But those closest to him were seeing something else entirely. In 1954, Danny Kaye became UNICEF's first ever Goodwill ambassador, a role he would hold for 33 years until his death. This work became, by many accounts, his greatest legacy. He traveled the world on behalf of UNICEF, visiting impoverished regions, meeting with children in desperate circumstances, raising awareness and money for humanitarian causes. He worked tirelessly, using his fame to bring the plight of suffering children to the attention of the world. When UNICEF won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1965, Many people felt that Danny Kaye's contributions had been instrumental to the organization's success. In 1986, he received the French Legion of Honor for his years of work with UNICEF. But even this humanitarian work, as genuine and impactful as it was, raises troubling questions. Was Danny Kaye truly driven by compassion for children? Or was he seeking redemption for the cruelty he showed to adults? Was he trying to balance some cosmic ledger, accumulating good deeds to offset bad behavior? Or perhaps, most disturbing of all, was his work with children another form of performance, another role he could play, another way to avoid confronting his authentic self? We'll probably never know the complete truth, but the contradiction between his public humanitarianism and his private cruelty demands acknowledgement. Away from cameras and charitable work, Danny Kaye had a life filled with unexpected passions and obsessions that further illuminate the complexity of his character. He became an accomplished pilot, eventually certified to fly virtually every type of aircraft, including commercial jets like the Boeing 747. Think about that for a moment. Danny Kaye could fly a 747. He wasn't just dabbling in aviation, he was obsessed with it. He formed a friendship with William P. Lear, the inventor of the Learjet, and even served on the board of the Learjet Corporation. Danny once said he was qualified to fly single and multiple engine airplanes and jets, and he fully intended to become an airline pilot when he left show business. What drives someone to pursue that level of expertise in something completely outside their profession? Perhaps it was another form of escape, another way to transform into someone else, someone with a different life and different responsibilities. He also became a master chef, particularly specializing in Chinese and Italian cuisine. This wasn't casual cooking. This was obsession-level culinary skill. Danny had a custom-made Chinese restaurant installed at the rear of his Beverly Hills house by its alley, then had a full kitchen and dining area built around it. He would invite celebrities like Shirley MacLaine, Michael Caine, and others to elaborate dinners where he would cook multiple-course Chinese meals from scratch. His passion for Chinese cooking became so well known that he developed a relationship with Johnny Can, who owned a famous Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. Danny would fly his own plane to San Francisco just to learn new techniques from Chef Can, then return home to practice and perfect the dishes. Why Chinese cooking? Why aviation? Why all these elaborate hobbies that required such intense dedication? Perhaps because mastering complex skills gave Danny Kaye a sense of control that his emotional life lacked. When you're flying a plane, the rules are clear, the outcomes are predictable, and your success depends entirely on your own skill. When you're creating a perfect dish, you're following a recipe with defined steps and measurable results. But human relationships? Those are messy, unpredictable, requiring vulnerability and authenticity that Danny Kaye seemed constitutionally incapable of providing. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Danny's career continued, though his personal life remained turbulent. He and Sylvia maintained their arrangement, staying married while leading essentially separate personal lives. She continued to control his career, writing much of his material and making decisions about which projects he would accept. Their relationship was described by those who knew them as professional rather than romantic, a business partnership that happened to be legally bound by marriage. Danny continued to have affairs, both with men and women according to various accounts, though the details remained mostly hidden from public view. But there's another layer to this story that we need to examine, one that involves Danny Kaye's relationship with his own Jewish identity and how that intersected with his public persona. Danny came from Ukrainian Jewish immigrants, grew up in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood in Brooklyn, and his early career included performances at Jewish weddings and in the Catskills Borscht Belt circuit, where Jewish comedians honed their craft. Yet as his career progressed and he became a major Hollywood star, his Jewish identity became less prominent in his public image. He was simply Danny Kaye, American entertainer, not Danny Kaye, Jewish entertainer. Was this another form of hiding, another way of obscuring his true self? Or was it simply a necessary adaptation to an industry and a society that often marginalized Jewish identity during that era? The academic paper on The Double, The Hidden, Queer, and Jewish Career of Danny Kaye, explores this duality, examining how Kaye navigated both his Jewish identity and his complicated sexuality in an era when both could be career-ending if presented too overtly. The title of the paper references On the Double, a 1961 film in which Danny Kaye played dual roles, a fitting metaphor for a man who seemed to be constantly playing different versions of himself, depending on the audience. The paper suggests that much of Kaye's career can be understood as a careful negotiation of identity, always performing, always hiding, always showing audiences what they wanted to see rather than revealing what truly existed beneath the surface. As Danny Kaye entered the 1980s, his health began to decline. He was a heavy cigarette smoker for most of his life, though he tried to switch to a pipe after the Surgeon General's report was published in 1964, warning about the dangers of smoking. But the damage was done. In February 1983, at the age of 72, Danny underwent quadruple bypass heart surgery, a major operation that revealed the extent of his cardiovascular disease. During the surgery, he received blood transfusions, a routine procedure at the time. But something went terribly wrong. The blood was contaminated. Danny Kaye contracted hepatitis C from that transfusion, a disease that would slowly destroy his liver and compromise his already weakened immune system. For the next 4 years, Danny's health continued to deteriorate. The hepatitis C caused progressive liver damage, leading to complications that affected his entire body. He experienced episodes of internal bleeding, a common symptom of advanced liver disease. His energy declined. The man who had once bounded across stages and film sets with seemingly endless vitality now struggled with basic daily activities. But even in decline, even as his body betrayed him, Danny Kaye continued to maintain his public persona. He made appearances, gave interviews, and continued his work with UNICEF as much as his health permitted. The performance never stopped, not even when he was dying. On Sunday, March 1, 1987, Danny Kaye was admitted to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, suffering from severe internal bleeding and complications from hepatitis C. His condition was listed as extremely critical. For 2 days, doctors fought to stabilize him, but his body, ravaged by years of smoking, heart disease, and now hepatitis C, could no longer fight back. At 3:58 a.m. on Tuesday, March 3, 1987, Danny Kaye died of heart failure brought on by internal bleeding and complications of hepatitis C. He was 76 years old, though some sources mistakenly reported his age as 74. Even in death, confusion surrounded him. The world mourned. Newspapers around the globe published obituaries celebrating the life of a beloved entertainer who had brought joy to millions. UNICEF issued statements praising his decades of humanitarian work, noting that when the organization won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1965, Danny Kaye's contributions had been instrumental. The New York Times called him a puckish Brooklyn-reared comedian who sang, danced, mimicked, pantomimed, and joked his way to Broadway and Hollywood fame. The Washington Post described him as a master of nonsense. Television stations ran marathons of his films. Radio stations played recordings of his songs. The entire entertainment industry paid tribute to a legend. But behind closed doors, there were other conversations happening. Some of Danny's colleagues, the people who had worked with him over the years, had more complicated feelings. They remembered the cruelty, the belittling comments, the way Danny could make someone feel small with just a look or a few carefully chosen words. They remembered Tony Curtis's characterization of him as a very mean and bitter man. They remembered the rumors, the affairs, the secrets that Hollywood had politely ignored for decades. The public celebration of Danny Kaye's life was entirely genuine, but it wasn't entirely complete. Like everything else about Danny Kaye, his legacy was a performance, a carefully curated presentation that showed only certain angles while obscuring others. After his death, UNICEF created the Danny Kaye International Children's Award in his honor, ensuring that his humanitarian legacy would continue. His daughter Dina took over management of the Danny Kaye and Sylvia Fine Kaye Foundation, continuing her parents' philanthropic work. Dina has spent years working to preserve her father's legacy, participating in documentaries, giving interviews, and maintaining public interest in Danny Kaye's artistic contributions. In these interviews, Dina has occasionally confirmed aspects of the rumors about her father's private life, though she has generally tried to focus on his positive contributions rather than his personal failings. Sylvia Fine Kaye outlived her husband by 4 years, dying on October 28, 1991, at the age of 78. By all accounts, even after Danny's death, Sylvia remained devoted to preserving his professional reputation. She organized his papers, cataloged his performances, and ensured that the Danny Kaye that would be remembered was the performer, the comedian, the humanitarian, not the complicated, contradictory, often cruel man that he was in private. But here's what makes Danny Kaye's story so compelling and so disturbing. He's not an anomaly. Hollywood has always been filled with people who present one face to the public while living completely different lives in private. The difference with Danny Kaye is the stark contrast between his public persona as a purveyor of joy and his private reputation for cruelty. Most celebrities have public personas that are slightly better versions of their real selves. But Danny Kaye's public persona seemed to be the complete opposite of who he actually was. The man who made children laugh allegedly made adults cry. The man who advocated for humanitarian causes allegedly treated his colleagues terribly. The man who seemed so comfortable in his skin on screen was allegedly tormented by inner demons that he could never quite escape. So what are we supposed to do with this information? How are we supposed to reconcile Danny Kaye the performer with David Kaminsky the person? Can we separate the art from the artist? Should we? These are questions that every generation grapples with as new information emerges about beloved public figures. In Danny Kaye's case, the questions are particularly acute because his humanitarian work genuinely helped millions of children around the world. UNICEF's success in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s was partly due to Danny Kaye's tireless advocacy. Children who might have died from preventable diseases lived because of the awareness and funding that Danny helped generate. Does that humanitarian work excuse his personal cruelty? Of course not. But does his personal cruelty negate his humanitarian work? That's a more complicated question. Perhaps the most honest answer is that Danny Kaye was exactly what his life suggests. A deeply damaged person who found a way to channel some of that damage into art and humanitarian work, while inflicting other aspects of that damage on the people around him. He wasn't a monster, but he wasn't a saint either. He was a human being, extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily flawed, capable of both great compassion and great cruelty, often simultaneously. The tragedy of Danny Kaye's life isn't that he was cruel to people. It's that he apparently could never be authentically himself with anyone, not his wife, not his lovers, not his daughter, maybe not even himself. He spent his entire life performing, and in the end, we're left wondering if David Kaminsky, the boy from Brooklyn who wanted to be a surgeon, ever really existed at all, or if he was completely consumed by Danny Kaye, the persona he created to escape his circumstances. What we know for certain is this. Danny Kaye's twisted double life was far darker than most people realized. The wholesome image that dominated his public persona masked a reality characterized by infidelity, rumored affairs with both men and women, alleged cruelty to colleagues, and a fundamental inability to sustain authentic human connections. He lived in a house he built for himself, both literally and figuratively, surrounded by all the trappings of success, but apparently empty of genuine intimacy or peace. He flew planes to escape, cooked elaborate meals to control, performed constantly to avoid ever having to be still, ever having to be quiet, ever having to be real. In the end, Danny Kaye died as he had lived, performing until the very last moment. His final performance was convincing the world that he was exactly what he appeared to be. And for decades, that performance worked. People remembered the songs, the films, the humanitarian work, the smiles, the laughter. They didn't ask too many questions about what lay beneath. But now, with the perspective of time and the revelations of biographers and colleagues, we can see the fuller picture. And that picture reveals a man far more complex, far more contradictory, and far darker than the character he played for most of his life. The story of Danny Kaye is ultimately a story about the cost of fame, the burden of performance, and the tragedy of living your entire life as someone other than yourself. It's a reminder that the people who make us laugh the hardest are often crying inside. It's a warning about the dangers of worshiping celebrities without understanding the human beings behind the personas. And it's a question that we all have to answer for ourselves. When we learn that our heroes are flawed, how do we reconcile the good they did with the harm they caused? There's no easy answer, and perhaps that's appropriate. Danny Kaye lived a life without easy answers, so his legacy should probably be equally complicated. What we can say is that Hollywood has always been an industry built on illusions, and Danny Kaye was a master illusionist. He made us believe in joy while harboring bitterness. He made us believe in kindness while allegedly displaying cruelty. He made us believe in authenticity while living a carefully constructed lie. And maybe, in the final analysis, that's the real secret life of Danny Kaye. Not the affairs or the rumors or the alleged cruelty, but the fact that everything about him was a secret, hidden behind layer after layer of performance, until the real person, if he ever existed at all, was completely obscured. That might be the darkest truth of all. That Danny Kaye performed so completely, so totally, for so long, that he performed himself out of existence, leaving behind only the character, only the persona, only the illusion. And we, the audience, applauded.